Today, I'm going to be presenting you with my choices as to what I think are the best Linux distributions in 2022, dividing my choices into 4 categories of users: brand new computer users, everyday average users, power users, and finally developers or computing students. This is actually part 2 of what started out as a 1-part video. Check out part 1 somewhere here, where I go over what a Linux distribution is in the first place, the different families of Linux distributions and their derivatives, as well as the main features which set distributions apart. So, let's roll the intro and then jump right in. We'll start with the first category, brand new computer users. Now, if you fit into this category, chances are you're not watching this video. Rather, you're probably watching because you want to get that non-technical person in your life hooked on Linux and want something simple to get started with. Well, for that, the winner is Elementary OS. Really, the name does say it all. What makes Elementary so, well, elementary is that the human interface guidelines for this distribution emphasize a gentle learning curve with immediate usability, which in fairness is the approach closest to that taken by both macOS and Windows, especially for basic desktop use. Elementary is decidedly more macOS-like in appearance, not just because of the dock at the bottom, but also because the desktop environment and included apps are made to offer little in the way of customization, allowing an easier to use and more streamlined experience. Elementary uses the Pantheon desktop environment, which is built by the Elementary team and based on GNOME libraries. Like the rest of the system, Pantheon emphasizes simplicity over customizability. This extends to apps created for Pantheon, with names like Music, Calendar, Files, and Installer. No confusion here as to what the app does. Elementary has an interesting pay-what-you-can model for applications installed via the Elementary App Center. These are apps which have been specifically made for Elementary OS, following the same design guidelines and with simplicity in mind. When installing an app, you can choose to pay, or rather donate, some amount to the developers of the app, which helps to support development. This is entirely optional, and the amount can be set to 0 if you wish. With its good looks, easy-to-use apps and software center, stable releases and supporting community, you really can't go wrong recommending Elementary OS to a brand new user. The second category is everyday users. Now, I must admit that I'm hesitant to give a recommendation here, as opinions are like assholes, and this is a very wide category. However, for this category of everyday use, Pop! OS narrowly wins over Manjaro. Now, first of all, Pop! OS is based on Ubuntu, which is the primary reason Pop! OS wins this category. Love it or hate it, when you get stuck trying to do something on your Linux system, you're going to Google it, and the majority of those search results are going to target Ubuntu. In 99% of cases, you can simply use the same tutorials or guides you find for Ubuntu on Pop! OS and get the same results. Now that might make you ask, well then why don't I just use Ubuntu in the first place? That's because of the second reason. Pop! OS is great for gaming. I've tried many Linux distributions and few make it as easy to game on Linux as Pop! OS does, whether you have an NVIDIA or AMD graphics card. The drivers just install out of the box, Steam is in the pop shop, and everything just works. Not to say you couldn't do this on Ubuntu, of course, but gaming on Pop! OS is specifically one of the reasons the system was designed for in the first place. Another reason I chose Pop! OS for everyday users is the Cosmic Desktop. It is based on GNOME, at least for now, and provides an entirely optional tiling experience which really helps make better use of your display. Again, it's entirely optional, so it won't bewilder you if you've never used desktop tiling before. However, once you get the hang of it, you'll wonder why you use desktops in any other way. Manjaro, on the other hand, is available with different desktop environments, with XFCE being the flagship. Now, there's nothing wrong with XFCE, it's just a bit basic, and call me foolish, but I actually like my desktop to look pretty. And to quote Ubuntu creator Mark Shuttleworth, pretty is a feature. The Pop shop on Pop! OS makes installing software for the average user a breeze, although in my opinion there's room for improvement here, especially with packages being both on Flatpak and Debian, which is really confusing, as well as the overall stability of the app. Manjaro is based on Arch, which has the Arch user repositories, meaning there's very little chance of not finding a program you need in there. That being said, I've yet to find a program that wasn't in the user repositories except DaVinci Resolve, for which a deb is easy to generate. Again, I realize this may be an opinionated choice, but I truly believe Pop! OS provides the best experience for the everyday user, at least in 2022. That being said, Manjaro, Garuda, Ubuntu, Fedora, and many others are also great choices here that you can consider if Pop doesn't float your boat. The third category is power users. Now, I should start this category by clarifying what I mean by a power user. After all, I'm a self-proclaimed power user, and yet I use Pop! OS, which won the previous category. What I mean by power user is someone who needs to tweak their system in a very specific way without having to fight the system whilst doing it. The system should allow the user to swap a kernel with ease, get into the nitty-gritty of the init system or systemd, and mess around with swap space. For this category, my choice is Arch. Arch Linux doesn't have any training wheels. You're plunged deep into a text-based installer and have to configure your system from scratch. However, if you fit into this category, that's a good thing. You'll learn the fundamentals of Linux whilst having the ability to customize it at every turn. And despite the customizability and power of the system, it's also fantastic for everyday use. The real reason people love Arch are the Arch user repositories, AUR, where you can find pretty much any software ready to be installed on your system. These are not official Arch repositories, so software there may not be validated or tested to work with your system, but that's okay. You're a power user who specifically wants to tinker with your system in the first place. The rolling release nature of Arch also means you'll always have the latest and greatest version of your software, and the sheer popularity of Arch means that when you get stuck, and you will, there's plenty of help to find online. The fourth category is Linux developers and computing students. Now, this final category is a bit niche, but I think it's important to include considering the open source nature of Linux. Now, to clarify, when I say Linux developers, I don't mean programmers who happen to be programming on Linux. Rather, what I mean is those using GCC for native low-level Linux application development, as well as hooking into the system scripts or even tinkering with the kernel. It also includes those wanting to create their own independent Linux distribution, or ship a Linux-based appliance, for example. Also, when I say computing students, I mean a university-level student who is specifically studying operating systems or software and wants to learn how one is built. Now, for these cases, my recommendation is a book. Yes, a book called Linux from Scratch. This online, freely available guide will show you how to set up a Linux system from, well, scratch by downloading all of the programs you'll need as source code, compiling them yourself, and installing them into place. The process is long, complicated, and often fraught with issues you'll have to solve yourself. In order to measure how long it takes to install Linux this way, you'll need to forget your watch and get a calendar instead. However, the benefits for students and developers alike can be immense. You'll know what every single component and program on your system does, and by virtue of having to install it, you'll learn its functionality and command line options. You'll also learn about compiling and installing software from source code. and you'll end up with a system which is truly yours and which contains only the absolute basics of what you need. Great if you're trying to create a stripped down version of Linux. Now I'll add here, if you like the idea of building a Linux system in stages from source, but maybe want the process to be ever so slightly more guided, you may want to consider Gentoo. Gentoo also builds all software from source, but includes a powerful package manager called Portage, which can make living with your system once you've built it a much more realistic endeavor. So there you have it. Elementary OS for absolute beginners, Pop! OS for everyday users, Arch for power users, and Linux from scratch for computing students and Linux-specific developers. I hope you found my suggestions useful. Whilst trying to be as objective as possible, these suggestions are, of course, opinionated, since they're my opinions. There are many great Linux distributions out there, and I certainly haven't tried them all. So if you have the time and the will, go ahead and try any distribution you want and learn that way. But if you have a life to live and want to get started straight away, my pick per category will get you on the right track. I hope this video has been useful to you, and if it has, why not leave it a like and subscribe to Tech Guru for more Linux and open source content, as well as tech content in general. Also, if you really want to help this channel like these awesome people here, check me out on Patreon, where you can support this channel financially in return for perks like early access to videos, your name in the credits, an exclusive Patreon chat, and much more. I truly appreciate that. Oh, and if you want to watch me outside of YouTube, be sure to check me out on Odyssey. Well, that's it for now. As always, thanks for watching.